Welcome back to Rising. Now, the Supreme Court has handed the Trump administration two of their biggest legal wins yet. Two separate cases brought before the court, both regarding the controversial deportations last month to a Salvadorian mega prison, and both favoring the Trump administration. Joining us with the latest is the Hill's Washington correspondent, Drew Petrimoulx. Good to see you, Drew.
Well, hey, Robbie and Marianne. The bottom line here is the Supreme Court says the Trump administration can continue to use that 18th century wartime law to deport Venezuelan migrants, at least for now. But there is one important caveat, and that is that the administration must give courts reasonable time to review cases before migrants are deported. The ACLU is arguing on behalf of the migrants and says that due process is an important victory, and it suggests the administration will have some hurdles to clear before resuming deportation. Now, last month, those flights carried hundreds of deportees to that notorious prison camp in El Salvador. It's important to note here that the Supreme Court is not ruling on the constitutionality of using the Alien Enemies Act in this way. The court says that challenge must take place in Texas, not Washington, D.C., where the original lawsuit was filed. The ACLU says it will take its case to Texas, so it's likely not the last we've heard of this issue. Also interesting to note, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who was, of course, appointed by Trump during his first administration, sided with the liberal justices in part of their dissent. That is likely to increase the criticism that she is receiving from some conservatives who have been very vocal, especially on social media, saying she's not living up to their expectations.
There are certainly a lot of Republicans who are frustrated with Amy Coney Barrett. In particular, there's also been some frustrations, I know, with John Roberts. Is this going to maybe make the mood on Capitol Hill a little bit more favorable toward the Supreme Court from Republicans? I have to imagine they're very excited overall about these rulings.
You know, I think it's probably going to depend on what happens next. These are kind of initial victories for the Trump administration, but there hasn't really been a ruling on the underlying cases here. Once those are ruled, maybe in lower courts, make their way up to the Supreme Court, and then the courts actually rule on the underlying basis of these cases and make decisions about whether these programs can continue or not. I think that will probably be the deciding factor on whether they face additional criticism from conservatives.
You know, Drew, I don't think of due process as something that should be considered a liberal or a conservative value. It's an important part of our constitutional system, of course, that protects all of us. And I think that the fact that the Supreme Court justices did, and I think it was 9-0, correct, did absolutely insist that going forward that people will have time to mount their cases and that they will have due process in all cases going forward. I think of it in a way as more than a caveat. I think that it's a major victory for those who wish to see all people. And remember, it's not just American citizens, but anyone in the United States have the protection of due process according to the law. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that's the point that the ACLU made after the ruling in that case, saying that the due process distinctions that were laid out by the Supreme Court is a very important victory, and certainly there will be some hurdles before the Trump administration can resume those deportation flights. Now, it will be very key to see how exactly that due process plays out. How are these migrants and their lawyers able to challenge these cases in court? And of course, there are already migrants that are sitting in that prison complex in El Salvador. So what will be their ability to go back and challenge these rulings and have due process play out properly? I think there's some concern among the lawyers for those migrants that it's going to be difficult to challenge these cases, and will they have enough time to work their way through the courts in a way that's at least according to their lawyers, appropriate.
There's a lot of conversation already, of course, about not only the gentleman from Maryland. In that case, the administration has already said, yes, it was an administrative error, but also the young man Hernandez, the issue of the gay makeup artist, his being gay being such an issue, because that is why he was seeking asylum. I think that it's very important that we make a strong stand that it's bogus for the United States government to say there's nothing we can do. I'm sure that they do have power in cases where we know that the rights of these people were violated. I think we need a big push in this country among those who will demand that retroactively that due process does occur.
Well, and Drew, to that point, obviously Chief Justice John Roberts did halt the order to bring back a man that the administration has said was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The administration has said, well, he was mistakenly deported because he was not supposed to be deported specifically to El Salvador, but that we can't do anything to get him back now. And it sounds like the Chief Justice is saying that there will not be immediate intervention on the Supreme Court's part to fix that issue.
Yeah, that's we want to review that case a little bit. That's Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. He is also in that notorious Salvadorian prison complex. He was deported under a different ability that the administration is citing, a different authority that the administration is citing here. The Trump administration, again, does admit that there was an administrative error, but the administration maintains that he is has ties to this Salvadorian gang, MS-13. His family and lawyers say that's not true. It was based on the testimony of a confidential informant back in 2019. Back then, a judge allowed Abrego Garcia to stay in the United States. After Abrego Garcia was deported, his lawyers filed a lawsuit, and a district judge said that he must be returned to the United States before a midnight Monday deadline. So early this morning, Justice Roberts last night put a stay on that command that he has to be returned back to the United States. The administration insists they can't actually bring Armando Garcia or Abrego Garcia back to the United States because he is now in the hands of Salvadorian authorities. Trump administration, of course, appealed that to the Supreme Court. It's important to note, though, again, on this case, Justice Roberts is not ruling on the underlying issue here. They're just ruling that the deadline to get him back in the United States will be extended.
Drew, thank you so much for that update. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, following the court's ruling on the Alien Enemies Act, Trump immediately took to social media to praise the decision. Trump posted on Truth Social saying the court upheld the rule of law and called it a great day for justice in America. Shortly after this decision, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, had this to say on Fox.
This was a huge, a monumental victory for President Trump. The biggest legal win of this administration so far. A total embarrassment for crazy Judge Boasberg, who's been trying to force this president to bring foreign alien terrorists back onto American soil, trying to turn our planes around, trying to empty prisons in foreign countries and bring them back to our soil. Those monsters can now be hunted down and expelled from this country with speed, force, and efficiency.
I don't know what to call the president and Stephen Miller in this case. Do I just call them spin doctors rather than liars? Because that is exactly what they're doing. The truth of the matter is that our Supreme Court has a spine. So far, the Supreme Court is standing, as Trump said, for the rule of law. But their standing for the rule of law here does not mean that they agreed with Trump on everything at all. They said that because the case had been filed in Washington rather than in Texas, it was a no-go. That's the rule of law. But the fact that they said that according to the rule of law, going forward, due process, everything that Stephen Miller just said was absolutely false information. He said, now we can just take these monsters off the street. No, you can't. The Supreme Court just told you, Stephen Miller, that you can't, that due process must occur. And that is the triumph of the law.
We agree that there needs to be a process, certainly, so that we don't accidentally deport people who are not criminals, or people who are American citizens, or people who have legal immigration status. We don't want to just disappear people off the streets. No one wants to do that. Absolutely due process. I'm totally in favor of that.
No one wants to do that.
I'm
Stephen
totally
Miller
in favor
and Donald
of that.
Trump wanted to do that.
This is a case about bringing
that
back
is what they have
a
been
man
doing.
to the United States who is and who has been proven before a court of law to be a member of MS-13.
Which? The gentleman in Maryland?
Garcia, yes.
No, he has not been proven before a court of law.
In 2019, the court made that determination based on an informant, based on the clothing he was wearing at the time, based on the circumstances of his arrest, and then he claimed basically asylum status because he said, well, rival gangs would hurt him or his family. That's conceding that you're part of a gang, and he should not have been deported to El Salvador. And I agree that he should be brought back here to be deported elsewhere. But it is not, the media had this, fabricated this entire notion that, oh, he's this wonderful father and all that. No, look, you could say the court was wrong. You could say the government presented the wrong evidence. Maybe that's the case. But they did make the claim that he was a member of a violent terrorist gang And the judge believed that based on the evidence presented by the government.
Then why do you
Doesn't mean it's right in every time, but you can't say that, oh, there was no evidence. There was evidence. It was presented. It was a informant who had a track record of successfully identifying members of this terrorist gang.
An informant, this is not an open and shut case. There are gray areas here, and it must be determined in court. As far as the young man who is the makeup artist, however.
Well, that case is different. He's not I don't believe that he's a member of a terrorist gang, and they should not have been deported.
And there are others as well who we now know had no criminal record whatsoever. What's important here is the big picture, not just this individual or that individual.
Well, no, but the liberal media has seized on this case, and they got over their skis on this one.
Well, I'm not. There are times when the liberal media, just like the conservative media, is telling us a bunch of BS. There is no doubt about that. But in this case, I believe the most egregious error on the part of the media is those who are claiming that this is simply a triumph for Trump because Trump is calling it a triumph. That is what Trump does. Even if he has a defeat, he calls it a victory. This is the way he operates. And that's why there's that wonderful movie, The Apprentice, where it talks about and it shows how his mentor, Roy Cohn, told him to do that. And that's why this BS from Stephen Miller, as well as from Trump on social media, is something that no media should be going along with. And yay to the Supreme Court. I think, and I know we're going.
I also say yay to the Supreme Court. They made the decision that this
well, they're going by the
proven
law.
and demonstrated terrorist individual is not going to be returned to our country by judicial fiat of a lower court until the Supreme Court takes a look at the case itself, which is
Correct.
the right way for it to do.
Right. I think they're straight down the middle, and that's all. That's what the Supreme Court should be, is straight down the middle. And when the gentleman was saying earlier, and when Drew was saying earlier, or you were saying earlier also, that conservatives are upset with Amy Coney Barrett and upset with John Roberts. Once someone is on the Supreme Court, just like once someone is in Congress, they have co-equal powers to the presidency. Their role is not just to do whatever Trump wants them to do. So I think the fact that
I
Amy
absolutely
Coney Barrett,
agree with that. I have great reverence for our Supreme Court, and I want our Supreme Court to stand up to the president regardless of what party they're in. I am used to now Democrats, frankly, arguing the opposite. Democrats saying there's all this judicial overreach, and they're not going based on settled case law, and they're overturning wills of Congress and Democratic presidents. They're saying, no, we can't do this, no, we can't do that, no, we couldn't do a vaccine mandate, no, we can't do student loan forgiveness, no, we can't do anything because the Supreme Court gets on our ways. And I'm like, well, sorry, you have to follow the Constitution.
No,
the Constitution doesn't give you endless power to do these things.
Excuse me. We have a conservative court now. So, of course, those of us who are not conservatives are going to be upset by some of their decisions. They're not machines, they're human beings. It is, by definition, an interpretive function. So there are times when those of us who are equally committed to the rule of law, equally committed to the Constitution, would have a different view of how decisions should be made. And that's why it's so important who these justices are. And once again, that's why it's so important that Amy Coney Barrett, and we'll see what happens with Roberts ultimately. Justices should not necessarily always be in the conservative camp or always be in the liberal camp.
And they're not. I mean, many decisions are, there are 9-0 and 8-1 decisions all the time. We don't hear about them, we don't talk about them because they're not controversial. There are lots of times where they agree, or where there's interesting, because they do have some different ideas.
They're
even
9-0
Gorsuch and
yesterday.
Jackson sometimes agreed on things that they don't because they have a more civil liberties kind of approach, and it's all very interesting.
Well, they were 9-0 on the issue of due process going forward. And I think what's important to remember is that when you take a stand for due process in a case like this, you're not just taking a stand for due process for these two gentlemen. You're taking a stand for due process for each and every one of us. You know what my dad used to always say, what they can do to anybody, they can do to you. And that's why these issues are so important and should be important to all of us.
Still ahead, Bill Maher says the Dems need their own Trump after he met with him. We'll discuss. Stay with us.